I'm going to invite you to stick your finger in John's Gospel, chapter 10. If you got a Bible, if you don't have a Bible, there's one in the seat in front of you. If you don't know where John 10 is, ask somebody near you, and I'm pretty sure they will be more than willing to help you. But just put your finger in there. We're going to get there. Okay. One of the recurring questions that I've been asked over my years in ministry is, how do I go about hearing God speak? I've actually had believers who have said to me, I've never heard God speak. I've never heard God speak. How do I go about hearing God speak? I asked you to come this morning with an area in your life where you would like some direction from God. And if you haven't done some thinking prior to this, you might want to think of something right now, an area in your life where you would like some direction from God, some clarity from God. Maybe it's a major life decision. Maybe it's something important that you're praying for direction. Maybe it's a relationship, college, university, work, a move, finances, health. Okay? So have something in your mind that you're asking God to intervene in. Okay? Now what I want you to do is I want you to be as specific as you possibly can be. I'm not asking you to write this down. I'm not going to ask you to shout it out. I'm not going to ask you to hand it in. Okay? So this is just between you and Jesus. Okay? Being as specific as you can, identify what it is that you are asking God to do in that area. Something specific. So if God did X, Y, and Z, the issue would be resolved. It would be over. It would be met. Okay? So you have the issue in mind, and you have that thing in mind that you're asking God to do. Everybody got something? Give me a nod if you've got something. Give me a shake if you don't. And you can just continue giving me the deer in the headlights look if I've lost you already. All right. So now before we go any further, I should warn you, I've got a couple of uncomfortable questions and statements this morning. Okay? Such a fair warning. Here's one of them. Is this request, is this desire, is this thing that you're asking God for, is it self-centered or is it God-centered? Is it about you or is it something that will bring glory and honor to God? Is it something that will extend his kingdom or is it something that will just make your life more enjoyable, more comfortable? Yeah? Again, that can be an uncomfortable and awkward question at times, but I think it's an important question to ask as we bring our needs and our concerns before the Father. And it's a question, I don't know about you, but it's a question that I almost always forget to ask when I've got my list of things that I want God to do. Why am I asking God to do this? Why am I asking him to step in and intervene in this area of my life? Okay, moving on. So, you've got that thing that you would like to see God do. You know exactly what it is that you're asking God to do. How are you going to determine God's will? How are you going to determine God's leading in that area? How are you going to determine what God is guiding you to do in that area? How will you know when God has answered? How do you decide? How do you find clarity? How do you determine God's will in that particular area of your journey? So one of the things I was told growing up was you pray for a thing and if it happens, God said yes. And if it doesn't, he said no or wait a while. Yes, so some of you have heard it as well. So yes, no, wait a while. And I'll confess, I did follow that practice for a while because, it seemed to make sense. I trusted those who taught it to me. But eventually it became really unsatisfactory for me for a couple of reasons. First, it didn't help me know what it was that I was supposed to do. Some requests, some needs are more complicated than yes, no, or wait a while. For example, Father, how do I help my friend who is wrestling with suicide? Yes, no, wait a while. Like, how does that help me? Right? Secondly, it seemed to me that I wasn't waiting to hear from God, but I was waiting for my circumstances. And then I was sticking a God said sticker on it. What if most of us spend our time confusing our circumstances with the voice of God? That's another one of those awkward questions. What if what we think is God speaking is no more than the unfolding of our circumstances? I don't need to be a believer to wait for my circumstances. Everybody just waits for their circumstances. If I'm looking for a job and I've got 3 job opportunities and I just wait till I get an offer from one, I don't need to be a Christian to do that. I just wait until I get a job offer from one, right? So what if most of us spend our time confusing our circumstances with the voice of God? What if what we think is God speaking is nothing more than the unfolding of our circumstances? The truth is, it is easier to use our circumstances to make decisions than it is to develop a relationship with God where I can hear him speak. Consider Israel's transition from slavery to freedom in the Old Testament. Moses and Aaron come out of the desert. They say, God has heard your cries. He is going to set you free. Hey, God's going to set us free. Hallelujah. We read in Exodus chapter 4, the people believed, they bowed their heads, and they worshiped. God is going to free us because of their circumstances. But then Pharaoh makes their slavery more difficult. And suddenly they didn't believe anymore. In fact, the next time Moses goes to them and speaks to them in the name of the Lord in Exodus 6, they did not listen. Then they witness a series of plagues that brings Egypt to its knees. And again, hey, God is on our side. God is going to set us free. It's obvious God's going to set us free. Look what he's doing. Woo! And then they found themselves trapped between Pharaoh and the Red Sea. You remember the story. And they went, oh, we're all going to die. That's the reason we were brought out of Egypt, to die. Why? Because of their circumstances. Red Sea parts, they go through the Red Sea. Yay! We were set free. Right? God set us free. And then they got a little thirsty. Oh, we're all going to die. Yes? God provides water. Yay! We're all going to live and possess the promised land. They got a little hungry. Oh, we're all going to die. I mean, just over and over and over again based on their circumstances. Yay! Oh, yay! Oh, yay! Oh. Just over and over again. So honestly, do we hear God's voice as much as we say we do, or are we simply assuming it's God because that's the way how things turned out, and so it must be what God wants? Again, I know that's an uncomfortable question to face. Some of you are going back on decisions that you have made over the last 6 months or years, 3 years or 5 years. If I'm trying to find a job and I apply to 3 jobs and I get 1 job offer, I can say, God wanted me to take this job. But in truth, I'm only saying that because I got the 1 offer. Maybe there's a 4th offer that's coming in 2 weeks, and he wants me to wait. Or maybe God would tell me to call offer number 3 or place number 3 and say, look, I got a job offer and I'm going to take it. You know, it's your last chance to have me. Do you know what I'm saying? Like there are a host of other possibilities than yes, no, or wait a while. Many of us, most of us, are living our lives controlled by our circumstances. And the problem with the practice is that it's rooted in this belief that God doesn't speak in ways that we, his people, can hear and clearly understand. So we've got to come up with some way to figure out what it is that he might be saying to us. And if we keep living this way, eventually we stop listening for his voice, we stop waiting on his leading, and we simply wait for our circumstances to change. And we never grow beyond wandering around in our own spiritual deserts, alternating between complaining and praising, depending on our circumstances. But what if? What if God is always speaking? What if God is always present? What if God is always near, guiding and directing us? So John chapter 10. I'm going to start at verse 1. These are the words of Jesus. John chapter 10, starting at verse 1. Truly, truly, if you've got the old King James, verily, verily. If you've got maybe the NIV, it might say, I tell you the truth. I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens, the sheep hear his voice. And he calls his own sheep by name. He leads them out. And when he has brought out all who are his own, he goes before them. And the sheep will follow him because they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from a stranger because they do not know the voice of a stranger. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So Jesus says it all over again. Jesus backs up, starts over, expands it a bit to help them understand. I'm going to jump down to verse 14. Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. So there's a similarity of knowing there, right? And I lay down my life for the sheep. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. Accept that as truth. That was verse 27. My sheep hear my voice. I know them. They follow me. Accept that as truth. Even if you don't feel it, accept it as the starting point, the foundation, the promise. Accept it by faith. These are the words of Jesus. He says it so. He says that we, his people, hear, we know, we follow. Everybody say hear. Hear. Say no. Say follow. Jesus said, my sheep hear my voice. Say, I hear his voice. I hear his voice. Y'all are not convinced. You're like, he must be setting us up for something. But I'm not. It's there in the text. Say, I hear his voice. I hear his voice. Jesus said, my sheep know my voice. Say, I know his voice. I know his voice. Jesus said, my sheep follow. Careful. Say, I will follow. I will follow. Okay, that's the tricky one. So let's start with here. So there's nothing spooky or hyper-spiritual with the word that is used here. The word here means what it says. His sheep hear. That is, they're not hard of hearing. They perceive him speaking. In John 10, Jesus seems to clearly contradict this notion that there is a secret to hearing his voice. That there are 10 steps to hearing his voice. That there's some sort of special skill or ability that is reserved only for certain people. People who have acquired the skill and learned the steps. Jesus doesn't say, if you follow these 10 steps, you will hear my voice. That's what he says. He doesn't say, hone these 3 skills and you will hear. That's not what he says. Jesus doesn't say, my sheep will eventually hear my voice when you jump through certain hoops or if you reach a certain age. He doesn't say that. Jesus doesn't say, my sheep can hear my voice, that they have the ability, but there's no promises. At least they have the ability to, but whether you will or not. He doesn't say that. Jesus says that if we are his, we are not just capable of hearing God's voice. According to Jesus, we actually hear his voice. He isn't even making a promise here. He's just stating it as a fact. My sheep hear my voice. The truth is, it's not that we don't hear God's voice. And there are many reasons here, but I wonder if one of the reasons why we think we don't hear God's voice is that we've grown accustomed to so many other voices that it becomes a struggle to distinguish God's voice in the midst of all the noise and the static of our lives. I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you're in a mall, you're in a crowded food court, and the person that you're with, maybe a friend or maybe your child or maybe your spouse or maybe a parent calls you, and they're on the other side of the food court, but you hear them because you recognize their voice. You ever had that experience? Parents, you're in the mall with your family and your kids are over on the other side of them, and you hear them cry, and you're like, I know that cry, right? You ever had that experience? Because it's a voice you recognize. It's very hard to pick up a voice you do not recognize in the midst of a crowd. Another way of saying it is, the more you recognize the voice, the easier it is to distinguish. So, can you recognize the Father's voice? I mentioned earlier, I don't know how many times I've heard people, Christians say, I've never heard God speak. And in almost every case, where a person is a believer, and I've said this, it's not that they haven't heard God, it's just that they don't recognize his voice. They have their mind made up of what God's voice should sound like. Maybe they heard somebody in their church talk about it, or they went to a conference and they were told, this is what it's like when God speaks. And so they're expecting that kind of experience. And because they didn't have that kind of experience, they assume that God hasn't spoken to them. According to Jesus, if you are his, you hear him speak. But the hearing is not the end of the journey. God's desire is that hearing would move us to knowing, would move us to intimacy. I thought somebody was giving me a soundtrack there. I was like, wow, perfectly well timed there. So what does it mean to know? Now, first of all, I think that most of us will know that in English, know can mean different things, right? There are different kinds of knowing. The biblical languages have different words for the different kinds of knowing. English, we say, I know, I know, I know. And all three of those are different, but you don't know that, never mind. So the first is the cognitive know. This is head knowledge. So I might say this child knows how to count to 100. It's head knowledge. It's been acquired through study or training. For those high school students, don't get anxious with this next one. If angle A is 60 degrees and angle B is 90 degrees, angle C is 30. Well, I didn't see anybody hold up a protractor. How did you know that? It's cognitive know, right? You've learned that. Here's another one. Angle A, 90 degrees, angle B, 45 degrees. We know E and F are equal in length. We know that. I don't have to get out a ruler. I don't have to measure it. I know that, right? For many of us, when we say we want to know God, this is the know that we're talking about. It's the information piece. I want to know God so that I have an answer for my atheist neighbor, so that I can win an argument with a friend at school about creation. I want to know the verses to use to respond to, Muslims or Mormons or, the Jehovah's Witness that comes to the door, right? It's concrete knowledge. I want to know the words to use in order to have my prayers answered. Now, don't get me wrong. There is nothing wrong with this kind of know. Nothing wrong with it at all. I know John 3:16 and I can recite it. I know it. There's nothing wrong with that. I know the stories of David and Goliath, of Daniel in the lion's den, of Esther, Mary, right? By the way, ladies, Women's Connection, May 27th. My wife is going to be speaking. She's memorizing Esther for that presentation. Yeah, I'm making her more nervous by saying that, but yeah, she's going to start with a recitation of Esther. Nothing wrong with this kind of know. Knowing of Mary and Joseph and their trip to Bethlehem. I know Jesus lived, walked, healed, died, rose again. Nothing wrong with that level of know, this information, fact-based, head-knowledged know. This know has its place. It's important. But then there's the experiential know, right? I know my neighbor is a friendly guy. I know because I live next door to him and I've experienced his friendliness. When the disciples scattered throughout the known world saying Christ is risen, it wasn't just head knowledge. They had seen him and felt it, and they'd heard him, they'd walked with him, talked with him, they'd eaten with him. It was more than head knowledge, it was experience talking. That's why John in his first epistle begins this way, that which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen, our eyes looked on, our hands handled. This is what we are making known to you concerning the word of life. He had experienced it. Yes? This is the know, if we are honest, that most of us pursue. The know of tingles and tears shed in his presence. The know of shouts and sighs. The know of his embrace. The know of hands raised in adoration, the know of fervent prayer, the know of a group of friends gathered together in prayer so sweet that time flies and nobody seems to notice or want to leave. The know of verses revealed that fit perfectly our situation, where we know this is God speaking to us. This is the know we want. Now, as with the first know that we talked about, there is absolutely nothing wrong with this kind of knowing when it comes to faith. In fact, as a child moves from knowing their letters to learning words, learning to read, at some point, we too must move beyond knowing the stories about Jesus to knowing Jesus personally ourselves, experiencing him. But there is a danger here as well. There's a danger that we become so focused on the emotion and the tingles and the feelings that we begin to chase not God, but the experience, the emotion, the buzz. Another danger with this know is that this is the know most of us are content to live with. Give us a church service where we see signs and wonders and we feel the presence of God every Sunday, and most of us would be content with that, would we not? We would show up and we'd get our Holy Ghost fix and we'd be happy with that. Give us a service where we feel God each week and we will ask for nothing more. It's sad, I think, how many believers have never really experienced God's presence. How few know God by experience. And it's sad also the many who have experienced God, it's something in the distant past. I remember when I went to this thing. We had this speaker. We had this worship. We had this. I remember when. And it's always something that happened in their past. But what is even more tragic is how so few of us will ever get beyond this kind of knowing. See, there's at least one more type of knowing. Most online dictionaries won't include it in their definitions, but I did find in Merriam-Webster, they included it under the heading archaic. In other words, nobody uses it this way anymore, but this is how it was sometimes used in the olden days. Check out Genesis chapter 4, verse 1 in your favorite Bible translation. Now Adam knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore a son. Some of the newer translations will translate it out. They put in, now Adam had relations with his wife, or now Adam was intimate with his wife, or Adam made love to his wife. And that's an accurate translation into the vernacular, but it runs the risk of missing the fact that the Hebrew word that is used in Genesis chapter 4, verse 1, is also used throughout the scriptures to refer to the relationship that God is inviting us into. He wants us to know him in this intimate way. It is a knowing that is intimate and transparent and exposed and vulnerable and invasive and risky and yielding. That's why I'm calling it the know of intimacy. If you want a passage that uses this same know, Jeremiah 31 verses 31 to 34, 35, uses the same word. When you say you want to know God, what kind of knowing are you referring to? Are you looking for the words, the verses, to win an argument with someone, to prove that you're right, to prove that there is a God, to prove creation? Or are you maybe looking for the experiential know, where you pray and feel his presence, a tingle, and the tears begin to flow because it's so sweet, a know that comes from seeing signs and wonders? Do you want a taste of God? Or are you looking for the know of intimacy? Do you know the know that God wants? God longs for the know of Genesis 4. The intimate, transparent, exposed, vulnerable, invasive, yielding, risky knowing that, I'll be honest, my soul longs for, but it scares the heck out of me. It scares me because inherent in this knowing are things that clash with my flesh. Things like submission, things like yielding, things like surrender. It is invasive and exposed. It is vulnerable. And Jesus invites us as his sheep to move from just hearing his voice and just recognizing his voice to knowing him intimately. That's clear in John 10, verses 14 and 15. I'm the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me as the Father knows me. Just in case you want to know what kind of know he's referring to there. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay my life down for the sheep. But it doesn't stop here. My sheep hear. My sheep know. But there's more. My sheep follow. So for a long time, I thought of hearing the shepherd, hearing the voice of God as being the relationship, as being the whole point. I wanted to hear and recognize his voice because I thought, well, that's what it means to be a Christian. I hear and recognize his voice, and there we go. We're golden, and we just wait for heaven. Even with this picture of sheep and shepherd, it's pretty clear that hearing the shepherd is not enough. Knowing that it's the shepherd calling is not enough. He invites me to follow. According to Jesus, the sheep move. They follow. Not because the gate is open. They follow because they've heard the shepherd's voice. They follow not because of their circumstances. They follow not because they feel peace. They follow because they know and recognize the voice of their good shepherd. Can I be totally honest with you this morning? Okay, good. I'm not going to. I'm just kidding. I'm not sure I want to be with Jesus constantly. I mean, all the time? I'm not sure if I want the life of Christ alive in me. What I want is the power of Christ, especially when I need power. I want the wisdom of Christ, especially when I need wisdom. I want the knowledge of Christ when I need knowledge. I want the gifts of Christ, but to have the life of Christ overwhelm me or dominate me, drown out me, smother me, put my flesh to death. I mean, it's one thing to hear his invitations. It's another to recognize his voice, and that it's his voice that I'm hearing, but to follow Jesus, to follow the shepherd, to risk it all, to give up everything that I worked for and achieved and everything that I am. I'm the rich young ruler that we talked about last week. I know why he walked away. I know why he walked away. I mentioned this in our baptism class because somebody asked a really good question in the baptism class on Thursday. And I said this, every person here will face the invitation that the rich young ruler faced. Every person here will face it. It might not be about money for you, but every person who decides to follow Jesus will at some point have Jesus put his finger on an area in your life and ask you to surrender it and follow him. Everything. Again, it might not be money for you. Money might not be the thing for you. It might be a relationship. It might be time. It might be something you want to do with your future. I don't know what it might be for you, but every single person will face that moment where they stand before Jesus and Jesus says, all right, this is what it's going to cost to follow me. Jesus says if we want to be his disciples, we must take up our cross and follow him. And he was not talking about a piece of jewelry. There is a price to pay. And I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to be honest. To follow Jesus means there are certain movies that I cannot watch, that I do not watch because I follow. They might not even be bad movies. There are certain books I do not read, certain places I do not go, certain habits and behaviors that I must reject. And it's not always because they're bad or immoral. It's just because I follow the voice of my shepherd. That means that sometimes these are things that other Christians are still permitted to do, that I cannot do, because the call is not to follow the butt of another sheep. Yeah? The call is to follow the shepherd. My sheep, Jesus says, they hear. They know. They follow. Are you willing to believe Jesus? So the question of the morning, church, is this: not do you hear, but will you hear? Will you hear his voice? Not do you know, but will you give yourself over to knowing him intimately? Will you follow the shepherd's voice? I'm going to provide just a few moments of silence here. Again, because I think it's important for what we hear to settle. Some of it, you can let it blow away, and some of it specifically God might want to hone in for you in your own life. And I know that as soon as the service is over and we start having conversation and we get out to the car, sometimes we forget. So I want to just leave a few moments of silent reflection, and then I'm going to close that time off with a prayer that I used yesterday morning based on Psalm 65. But let's just take a few moments of silence. Father, what is it that you want me to live out as a result of your word, as a result of this passage, John 10?